Voices of Titanic podcast, episode 15, and I'm your host, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me today. It is great to be back. I was on a 10-day Alaskan cruise on the gorgeous, stunning, incredible, remarkable Cunard's Queen Elizabeth. It was the trip of a lifetime. It was everything a ship nerd could dream of. I highly recommend it if you can do it. It was everything. But I also took my son to see the Queen Mary for the first time, and then I started a new job. So please bear with me as I am adjusting to being back in the real world and adjusting to a new routine. But yes, the trip on Queen Elizabeth was incredible. There is so much old art. There is Art Deco. There is tributes to old commanders and the old ships like Mauretania, Lusitania, Queen Mary. There's, oh my goodness. And there was a behind the scenes tour that I was really lucky to do. And I got to talk to the captain and go up on the bridge. It was just the most remarkable, amazing trip. And I think in regards to this show and to just the Titanic story as a whole, this was my second cruise in my lifetime so far, but the first one I was super young. This was over 20 years ago, and I wasn't as into ships as I am now, and it just didn't really hit me the same way. So on this trip, I had become friends with a lot of other passengers and with crew. The staff is so incredibly kind, friendly, sweet, funny, everything you could want in a staff when you're away from home to make you feel like you're, somewhere safe, somewhere comfortable, somewhere welcoming. And it really dawned on me, a lot of these stories of the survivors have mentioned how they made friends with other passengers and how when they were rescued and went on the Carpathia, they couldn't find these people and they discovered that they had passed. And I just really thought about the tragedy of that, of if, God forbid, something were to happen and these staff and these friends I made, even though you don't know them that well, you know enough that they're decent people and that they have families, they have friends, they have people waiting for them back home, they have pets and coworkers and all these things. And you just think about these stories where the people would bond with others and form this camaraderie, which is what happens. You form like a little community on a ship, and then tragedy struck for them. And not only did people lose family, but some of them lost friends that they made and people that they befriended on the ship, whether it was their steward or somebody maybe bringing them their food or what have you. Maybe it was the purser. It's just, I don't know, it really just struck me because I felt so connected to these people when I was away from home, and I can't imagine something terrible happening and then them perishing. And I think that really added to the traumatic element for me for these people, and I don't want to say that the entire time I was on this trip, I was thinking about the Titanic and death and all that, but it was just kind of something that struck me when I came home and I went, oh my gosh, this adds a whole other element to what these people suffered and their grief. So, okay, enough about my trips, but just to say, episode releases are going to be a little bit slower and a little bit wonkier because I am trying to adjust to my new work schedule in life. So we will see what happens, but I am here now. And I had weeks ago tried to watch this show called Titanic Sinks Tonight, and I couldn't finish it. It was, I don't know, it was kind of like, it reminded me of those investigation discovery shows, and it was almost filmed like a crime series. But it was interesting. It just, they did get some facts wrong. And one of them was that they said, and I can't remember who it was, they said one of the stewardesses, I think it was Violet Jessup, was the youngest stewardess on the ship, which she wasn't. And then that got me thinking, oh my gosh, I want to cover the other stewardesses that perished. So for today's episode, I want to share a short story, but one that needs to be told nonetheless. So this is the story of stewardess Lucy Violet Snape. Lucy Violet Snape was born Lucy Violet Leonard on April 3rd, 1890 in Farnham, Surrey, England, to parents Edward James Leonard and Elizabeth Jane Adeline Caesar. Lucy's father was a non-domestic groom in his younger years, and this meant that he helped care for horses, and later on he would become a coachman, a senior servant that was responsible for the horses and carriages of a household. Her mother took care of the home and her many siblings. Lucy was baptized May 2nd, 1890 in their hometown of Farnham. Lucy was the oldest Leonard child and had 7 brothers and sisters. Her younger sisters were Bertha, Lillian, Gladys, and Ellen, while her younger brothers were Edward, Robert, and Adrian. Farnham is located on the Surrey-Hampshire border in the Surrey Hills and is known as a market town. It goes back all the way to the Middle Ages. Farnham was popular for its weekly market and had an annual fair which drew in visitors from nearby Surrey and Hampshire to buy and sell items. Farnham is also strongly associated with the creative arts and crafting, specifically pottery making. Farnham is also famous for being the home of several notable figures, including Elizabeth I, who at one point brought her whole court with her and ran the country from this town for 6 months. I thought that was a really interesting fact. Britain's first patrol-powered motor vehicle was built by Farnham native John Henry Knight, and the story of Peter Pan was actually written in Farnham by J.M. Barrie, while he occupied a cottage there. In 1891, the family lived at Seal and Sands in Surrey. Lucy's father worked as a domestic groom, and his sister Annie was staying with them as a visitor. 10 years later, the Leonards were living at what looks like Birtley Cottages. By the time the 1911 census rolled around, Lucy was out of the home. In 1909, at the age of 19, she married Captain Lawrence Edward Snape in the fall of that year in Tonbridge. Lawrence was 23 years older than Lucy at the time of their marriage. Born October 16, 1867, he was a native of Lowther, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, Westmoreland in England. The family lived at the Flying Dutchman Inn, and on June 18, 1910, Lucy gave birth to a baby girl, Margaret Isabel Snape. Margaret was christened on July 31st, 1910 in Kent, England. Because her husband, Lawrence, was the captain of a merchant ship with trade in the East, the Snapes eventually called Singapore home at 76 Kings Road on a settlement. In July of 1911, Lawrence joined his ship for a trading journey, and tragically, he fell ill and died due to dysentery. And depending on the source, either on the 11th or 18th in, I'm going to butcher this, and I'm so sorry, New Chang, China, near Hong Kong. Lawrence passed away intestate, which means he died without leaving a proper last will and testament. So his estate went to his widow Lucy, and it was valued at £636, 15 shillings and 11 pence. In late 1911, Lucy returned home with her baby girl Margaret to live with her parents. Leaving the port of Yokohama, Japan, mother and daughter boarded the Mishima Maru, which was a Yokohama European line ship. On December 7th, 1911, they arrived back home in London. I cannot fathom how awful this must have been for her. They had only been married 2 years, and their daughter was a little over a year old, and here she was, living alone and widowed across the globe from all she knew. And the pain and the grief, it must have been extremely immense. Understandably, Lucy wanted to provide for Margaret and needed to bring in an income. Her father, Edward, was working for a member of Parliament, Joseph King, who was a Liberal Party politician at the time. And with his influence, Lucy was able to obtain a position as a stewardess on the Titanic. And I think it is really admirable that as a widowed woman that she wanted to provide for her family and to take control and be the provider. On April 6, 1912, Lucy signed on as a second-class stewardess with a monthly wage of £3. She gave her address as Well Lane in Sandhills, Whitley, and reported to the ship at 6 a.m. on April 10, 1912 in Southampton. We have no record of Lucy's experience during the journey of the ship, but we have one news article. I believe it's based on the accounts of other stewardesses, and we did talk about this in the Catherine Jane Wallace episode, but the article reads, quote, "The stewardess matron, Mrs. Wallace, refused to leave her room. Her remark was, 'I am not going on deck. I am going back where I am safe.' Another one who refused to move was a second cabin stewardess, Mrs. Snape, a widow, 21 years of age with a little girl. As she fastened the lifebelts on her passengers, she wished them goodbye. Later, she told some of the stewardesses that she did not expect to see them again." End quote. This was from the Daily Sketch on April 30th, 1912. Lucy Violet Snape perished the night the Titanic sank. She was only 22 years old. Her body, if ever recovered, was never identified. Her estate was worth £234, 14 shillings and 2 pence. This was awarded to her father, Edward. The remaining assets from her husband, Lawrence, also reverted to Edward. Lucy's father and mother, Elizabeth, were designated as Margaret's guardians after the death of her parents. This poor little girl would grow up never knowing either of them. What's interesting is that young Margaret was not on the census with her grandpa Edward. She was living with the Wynnes in Kent, England. She is listed as a niece, and her last name was now given as McDougall. It shows that she's orphaned, and she lives not only with the Wynnes, but with 2 other McDougall women, presumably their mother, a widow. Now, I do believe in a census, sometimes the term niece can also refer to a young extended family dependent, and they are given the same last name. Even more interesting, Margaret ends up marrying a McDougall. I'm not sure how he is connected to the McDougalls she lived with, maybe a cousin. Either way, she wed John William McDougall on December 22nd, 1934 at St. Margaret the Queen on Barkham Avenue in Lambeth, England. Margaret was 24 years old at the time, and John was a 26-year-old bank clerk. The marriage was witnessed by John's parents, John and Lucy McDougall, and the couple lived at 87A Amesbury Avenue. Heartbreakingly, and I could not believe this, but Margaret became a widow like her mother. John passed away at only 30 years of age on March 10th, 1938. I could find no cause of death. In the 1939 England and Wales Register, Margaret is listed as a widow living in St. Pancras in London. It lists no occupation, and she possibly lived at 3 Warwick Avenue in Paddington in 1953. The trail runs cold for Margaret after this. I don't know if she ever remarried or if she had any children. From the looks of it on Encyclopedia Titanica, I don't think that she did. We do know that Margaret McDougall passed away after a long life, however. She died in January of 1996 at the age of 85. This whole story is incredibly devastating. Lucy was like the Titanic herself on her maiden voyage and also her last. She had barely lived any life. Lucy had decades ahead of her, and she lost her husband at such a young age too. To die in her early 20s and leave behind a baby that wasn't even 2 years old, it's unfathomable and tragic. Lucy wanted to be self-sufficient. She wanted to be a provider for her daughter. She should have been able to do that. We've run into this story again and again, parents trying to give their families a better life and losing their life in search of that opportunity. I can't think of many things much sadder than that or more unjust. I don't know why 20 other stewardesses were saved, and Lucy was one of the 3 that wasn't. If we are to take that quote in the paper as truth, it's possible Lucy stayed behind and stuck to her post, helping as many second-class women and children as she could. It's difficult for me to imagine that she would choose to stay behind when she had a little one at home, but there's also a possibility she was stuck on a lower deck, or maybe she was trying to convince Catherine Jane Wallace to come up to the deck and save herself. Sadly, we can only speculate as to why Lucy perished. I think we can confidently conclude that Lucy did serve her passengers and she saved lives that night. I hope she is remembered for that, for the difference that she made. And poor baby Margaret, losing both of her parents and being raised by different people, and then to lose her husband shortly into her own marriage. This girl had endured so much loss and trauma. It's truly unbelievable. What does give me comfort is I was reading a comment on Encyclopedia Titanica where a descendant of Lucy's sister Gladys shares that there are photographs of both Lucy and Margaret held within the family. I really hope that their stories are shared and that they are never forgotten. We will never forget you, Lucy, and we thank you for your service. Let's pause and have a moment of silence for Lucy Violet Snape and the hundreds of lives lost that night. Thank you, crew, for joining me in today's episode as we disembark. I wish you happiness, love, and peace as always. Take care, and I'll see you next time on the Voices of Titanic.